Good lives, the fringe benefits of failure, and the very good lives, the fringe benefits of failure, and the importance of imagination. J.K. Rowling is a British novelist and one of the best authors in history. She is best known for her Harry Potter books, which have sold almost 500 million copies worldwide. That is not a mistake, and have been translated into no less than 80 languages. Unsurprisingly, all of them have been turned into blockbuster movies, the last 2 of which were produced by Rowling herself. Very Good Lives is an illustrated and somewhat edited version of Rowling's 2008 commencement speech at Harvard University. If you haven't read it, then you should know the focal point sits on 2 topics, the benefits of failure, and the crucial importance of imagination. Since completing the Harry Potter saga, Rowling has continued to harness the written word as a tool for self-expression by writing a few more books. To understand the present, you must understand the past, and she through this book opens the door to her humble beginnings where everything started. Let's take a sneak peek into her early life. The beginning of the rags to riches story, looking back at the 21-year-old that I was at graduation, is a slightly uncomfortable experience or the 42-year-old that she has become, says Rowling at the beginning of this book. Not being at the right place surely was discouraging. And this might even be an understatement because she describes herself as an epic failure. Now, how did that happen? Difficult to say. She was always interested in writing, but since she came from a poor family, this was a career her parents hadn't encouraged one bit, thinking that writing would never pay a mortgage or secure a pension. I know that the irony strikes with the force of a cartoon anvil now, Rowling notes jokingly. So they didn't allow Rowling to study English literature, and as a compromise to them, she chose modern languages. But as she says, then before her parents' car had rounded the corner at the end of the road, Rowling decided to ditch German and scuttle off down the classics corridor. Basically, this means that the compromise resulted in the worst decision imaginable in the eyes of Rowling's parents, choosing a subject even less useful than English literature. It didn't matter that Rowling was a good student, simply, but nobody needed anyone telling the names of the Greek gods and nymphs. Fast forward a few years and an exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that my parents had for me, and that I had for myself, had both come to pass, and by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure. I knew the rock bottom and the benefits of failure. Now, it is important to note that Rowling doesn't blame her parents for trying to steer her in a different direction. Poverty is not an ennobling experience, she says, and since her parents had been poor for most of their lives, they knew full well the realities of poverty. Poverty entails fear, Rowling goes on, and stress and sometimes depression. It means 1,000 petty humiliations and hardships. Only fools whatever wants to romanticize it. However, even at our poorest, what Rowling feared the most wasn't poverty, but failure. And then she realized that her epic failure, no fun by any measure, was the greatest thing that could ever happen to her. Failure gave Rowling in the security that she never attained before by passing examinations. It's harder things about herself that she could have learned no other way. Among other things, Rowling discovered that she had a strong will and more discipline than she had suspected. Even more importantly, she also discovered that she had friends whose values was truly above the price of rubies. That's where things started getting better, not because something magical happened, but simply because nothing magical could ever happen. But she says that she could only write it because her failures revealed to her that nothing else mattered. The worst had happened, and she was still alive. If she had succeeded in anything she implies, most likely Harry Potter would be left unfinished because she would always have something to rely on. The same is probably true for each and every one of us. We have dreams, but we stop short of turning them into reality because our lives are comfortable enough to make us forget that we are not immortal. Amnesty International and the crucial importance of imagination. Looking back, Rowling realizes that her failures were great formative experiences. And the same holds true for one of her earliest day jobs as well. Namely, in her 20s, Rowling worked as a bilingual secretary and researcher at the African Research Department at Amnesty International headquarters in London. There she worked with many ex-political prisoners, people who had been displaced from their homes or fled into exile because they have the temerity to speak against their governments. And those were her co-workers. What her job entail? D was even worse, in some sense. While being immersed in this process, Rowling realized that she was able to empathize despite not having to go through the same problems as they did. Rousseau figured why we empathize centuries ago, because of the power of the human imagination. Unlike any other creature on this planet. Rowling reminds us humans can learn and understand without having experienced, they can think themselves into other people's places. And that is an enormous power. True, it can also sometimes be a burden. Since no matter how happy your life may seem to be, you can still suffer profoundly because of the pain people you don't know were going through. Even so, Rowling doesn't envy the people who never employ their imaginative powers. They suffer from mental agoraphobia, she says, and they are often more afraid. Your resume doesn't define you. Given a time, Turner writes J.K. Rowling, I will tell my 21-year-old self that personal happiness lies in knowing that life is not a checklist of acquisition or a key. Vehement, and she goes on, your qualifications, your CV, are not your life. Though you will meet many people of my age and older who confuse the two. Life is difficult and complicated, and beyond anyone's total control, and the humility to know that will enable you to survive its vicissitudes. And this comes from someone who was as poor as one C and B without being homeless, and became the author of the best-selling book series in the history of mankind. Human beings are exceptional in more than one way. One of the least talked about ways, however, is their capability to simulate the effects of something that has never happened to them merely through the imaginative powers of their brains. Rowling says that these powers can save humanity because empathy. Unknown speaker 5 o'clock stems from our capability to identify with people who suffer. And because if you choose to use your status and influence to raise your voice on behalf of those who have no voice, if you choose to identify not only with the powerful, but with the powerless, if you retain the ability to imagine yourself into the lives of those who do not have your advantages, then it will not only be your proud families who celebrate your existence, but thousands and millions of people whose reality you have helped change. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. Ancient quotes for modern students. J.K. Rowling ends her speech by quoting two ancient authors, and reminding the modern students how relevant their words still are. The first is Plutarch, a Greek biographer and Platonist, who once wrote that what we achieve inwardly will see. Hang out or reality. This is an astonishing statement, notes Rowling, and yet proven 1,000 times every day of our lives. It expresses in part our inescapable connection with the outside world, the fact that we touch other people's lives simply by existing. First, you should remember that Very Good Lives is a book version of a commencement speech for the 2008 Harvard graduates, and as Rowling explains to them, what Plutarch was trying to point out 2 millennia ago was relatively simple. Namely, being a Harvard graduate isn't such a minor thing. First of all, it means that you're an American citizen of the only remaining superpower in the world. Secondly, it means that you're either very wealthy or very smart. Not everyone can afford to be a Harvard graduate or be awarded a Harvard scholarship. And finally, it means that you've gotten the very best education an institution can offer. So in other words, some of the Harvard graduates of 2008, who listened to J.K. Rowling's speech, they one day become the people who decide whether the US should bomb another nation, or help the refugees from a different one. If Rowling's speech touches them, they may make a more humane decision and thus help the world in an exceptional way. The reason for that, a single speech which changed them inwardly. Rowling interspeed with another quote, this one by Seneca, as is a tale so is life, and OT how long it is, but how good it is what matters. Final notes: even though Very Good Lives is a fairly short book, it's undoubtedly one that can effectively change your life. And that's not used in the usual cliched way. Nor it is an exaggeration. One of the all-time most inspirational speeches, and thus one of the best graduation gift books ever. 12M and tip: being compassionate is all about being willing to get in the skin of the less fortunate ones and listen to their story. It's about giving voice to the voiceless, to the millions and millions of people whose stories are unheard, and whose disadvantages are often neglected by the watchful eye of the media. No one asks of you to change the world, but to open your mind to the reality that many factors influence a person's life trajectory and social situation. In a nutshell, people should be less judgmental and be willful to take action.